All right, so whenever
All
you're
right, we're glazing today. So this pot has been bisqued. This is the pinch pot with the added base for one of the first Ceramic One projects. And the bisque firing is to a low temperature, but it's still 1800 degrees Fahrenheit to get the chemical moisture out. It's a lot easier to pick up the work. I can hold it by the rim now and it won't break. And, but now I'm ready to glaze it. So the first thing I'm going to do is inspect it and see if there's any place that it is rough, where there might be a sharp edge, something that I need to clean off with a little sandpaper. When you do that, be sure that you do it over a bucket of water so that you don't get dust up into the air. It's not too bad. I don't want to lose my fingerprints because this is a pinch pot, but I'll just make sure that I don't have sharp edges. Then I'm going to take a sponge and make sure that I get all the dust off from any sanding. Also gets oils from our hand off, so that it's ready to be glazed. All right, this is the little coil pot, and it's got quite a bit of texture to it, but I'm going to go ahead and wipe it off too. I don't think I need to sand it, so that I'll have a couple of pieces to glaze and demo for you. The next step is to wax resist any place that you don't want glaze. And we fire to a high temperature. We're going to cone 10, which is 2345 degrees. We are not going to glaze the bottom of the piece. I also could use wax as a decorative pattern if I wanted to, but on this particular piece, I'm just going to clean off the bottoms. You'll notice I waxed these before we started the demo, so you can you have an idea. This is one of the most interesting pieces that you'll make over the course of a semester, is a covered pot. So I have the foot waxed, but I also have the rim of the lid waxed, so that when I put this together, I won't have any glaze to stick those together. So I'm going to finish waxing this rim, and I'll demo that. When I'm waxing, I'm going to hold it like this so that the wax doesn't drip down the side. I only want it where I don't want glaze. And you'll see when I put the wax on, it's shiny, wet looking, so I have to let it sit until that gets dry. That's another reason I did these pieces earlier. Right now, if I touch it, I'll pull off wax. So I'm going to wax the bottom of this. I'm going to set it upside down so that it does, if I set it down on the base, it would stick to my paper. And I'm going to wax the bottom of this. I like to wax up maybe as much as 1/8 of an inch, depending on what you're thinking about glazing your piece with. Some of our glazes are runnier than others. You'll find that out over the course of a semester. The trick with the wax is, in the olden days, we used to use paraffin, and we would mix it with turpentine, so we had fires. Nowadays, we have this nice wax resist, which is water-based, but it has to be cleaned out with hot sudsy water. Otherwise, it will get stiff on the brush, and the brush would be ruined. That's the reason I'm stepping over to the sink just to do this. With the hot water, so that the brush will stay malleable and good to use. All right. Then we're going to stir the glazes. The glazes primarily are made up of 3 ingredients. We have a clay so that the glaze will stick onto the pot. We have a glass maker, which is silica, and then we have something to melt that, because the clay and the glass don't melt unless we add a flux. So those are three main ingredients in a glaze. Then we might add opacifiers, we might add oxides for colorants like cobalt for blue. We have chrome, we have copper. Copper is red in reduction and green in oxidation. Those are two different firing techniques. So, but the chemicals are mixed just like you would mix a cake batter, and but so that they might get out of suspension. They're mixed in water. So I'm going to use Hannah's buttermilk. We have a little sample of it here to give us an idea. We also have the lids labeled and the chemical composition on the side of the piece. So you can identify the glaze that you're going to use. In the kiln room, we have stirring sticks. We also have big whisks. So you want to make sure that the glaze is completely in suspension. And so I can feel that I'm all the way down at the bottom. And so then I'm going to set it in a bucket of water. I'm going to put on my gloves before I'm ready to handle the chemistry. Many of the glazes are like chemicals that you find at the beach, and they're not toxic, but any of them that have cobalt or copper in them, you don't want to get chemicals through your skin, so it's a good idea to wear gloves. These are latex gloves that we provide for the studio. I forgot my ladle, so I'm going to grab that out of the glaze room. So, for glazing, there are many different techniques, but we're going to demonstrate today pouring and dipping. You can brush. I'm going to show you how to brush on glazes. And we also have a spray booth, which is really nice for large or complex sculptural pieces. If you want to get an even application of glaze, that's an excellent technique to use. But today I'm going to dip and pour, and then I'm also going to demonstrate brushing. And I think I'll start with the brushing while I'm letting the wax resist dry on the bottoms of these pieces. I've got a little leaf dish. This is similar to your first assignment, which is a relief, a shallow relief. And I've got a little whisk for this particular glaze. Is a new Celadon that we're experimenting with. And to get an even application when you're brushing, you want to do two directional layers. So I'm going to first go vertically. I'm going to call this vertically. And then I'm going to come back and give it a second coat and go perpendicular to that. So when I first put it on, you can see how it's shiny and it would come right off on my hand. So I want to let it dry, and you can see how it turns from shiny to matte. Then I'm ready to put the second coat on. And I'm going to come back with a perpendicular coat. You also want to detail everything that you do in your notebooks. I can see it's not going into that little drawn line, so there we go. Because if you get great results, you want to be able to do it again. So for this particular piece, I'm going to say I'll identify my glaze. I'm using this Celadon glaze, and I brushed it on. Because if the results are excellent and I can brush it, I have a lot of control when I'm brushing. So I'd like to be able to do that. Some glazes are more forgiving than others. I'm going to put a single coat of this on the back, and that way I'll be able to compare a thick coat with a single coat to see if there's a difference in character. Generally, Celadons like to be thick. Celadon is a traditional Eastern glaze, originally Chinese, Japanese, and Korean potters were trying to copy jade, the color of jade. So celadons can be bluish, they can be greenish, and we're always in the quest for a beautiful celadon. So this is our latest. Now, my wax is dry on the bottom, so I can set this piece aside and then clean out my brush. All right, so for this little piece, now I want to pour the glaze. Then while I'm letting that one dry, I'll show you how to dip the glaze. So I've got my glaze in suspension here, and I'm going to pour it on the inside first. And slosh it around. Oops, missed a little area there. All right, and again, it's very shiny, it's wet. If I stick my finger in it right now, I pull off glaze, so I want to let it dry. It'll turn mattish, mattish, you know, not mad-ish, but matte. All right, and then this is kind of an interesting option here. I can hold on to this, I could dip it in, or I can take my ladle and pour it around this outside area. Then I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do on the foot. And it may be something that I want to do to enhance the contrast, because the foot has quite a bit of texture on it. So I'm actually, I'm thinking what I'm going to do is take my brush, I'm letting this dry, and I'm going to paint over this, and then I'm going to take my sponge and I'm going to wipe off the top layer so the glaze will actually be in that texture on the foot. Still a little shiny, wet around here. I can see some drips, so I'm not going to turn it upside down yet until it dries just a little bit more. And I think now I can hold it on the inside. And I'm going to take the glaze and brush it over this texture. Place. Now, this could be interesting, this Hannes buttermilk. It's not my first choice for textures. So that's the reason I think what I'll do is wipe off the top layer after this dries. And just, all right, so the glaze has dried on the foot. So I just am going to take my damp sponge and rub it gently over the top, and then I'm exposing the ridges so that this will have a nice contrast of texture, highlighting the texture, but it'll also be shiny with the glaze and then matte with the clay body. So that could highlight the texture on that foot. All right. Then I want to glaze this cup. I'm still waiting for the coil pot to dry. And I'm going to glaze this with Hannes. I like Hannes on the inside, especially of coffee cups, because you can see the level of your drink. With a light glaze, it's a light glaze. And I'm going to hold on to the foot rim and dip this down in to Hannah's. Some people don't like the finger marks. Some people think, oh, it's the mark of the potter, so it's up to you if you like that aesthetic or not. I'm going to demonstrate using the tongs on our last little coil pot, and you can see how you can avoid that if you don't want the little finger marks. I'm just going to hold this till it stops dripping, and then I can turn it right side up. And I wanted to demo this one because I'd like to do 2 glazes together. All right, so that has a little finger pattern back there. I could go back and touch it up if I want to, or I can leave it as the mark of the potter. I'm going to leave it on this particular one. And I'm going to take a contrasting glaze. This is chun with cobalt and iron, and give it a stir. And once this piece is dry enough so I won't contaminate the glazes, I'm going to dip the rim. One thing I like to tell students is that as we talked about, there are those 3 main ingredients, so we have flux in this. As soon as I dip it into another glaze, I've got twice as much flux. So we can tend to have glazes that will feather and run. It can be a very beautiful effect, but sometimes it will run right off onto our shelves when we're firing them. So I'm going to suggest that you think about overlapping glazes and test our glazes and try it up at the top. That's how I glaze these little guys, so that I can see how much flow the kiln, the temperature in the kiln creates. And if it's stiff, if it doesn't flow very much, then I could do it all the way down to the foot. But I won't do that in the beginning. I'm going to just try to keep my line here up at the top. So I've got my glazes dry enough that I can dip it in. I'm trying to keep my line lugged down on this one. You can see I missed my line a little bit on this one, but it'll soften. I think it'll be interesting when it fires. And I just need to hold this, because if I flip it over too soon and that glaze is still shiny, I'll have a drip running down. All right, I think that's gonna be all right. All right, now our last little piece. This has gotten matte, so it's not going to contaminate the glaze. It's also going to resist any glaze from on the foot of the pot. And I wanted to show you that we have this nice little tong, so that if I want to glaze everywhere, I'm going to have a little tong mark out here that I can touch up later. But it really works pretty ideally. So I'm going to take it, and you'll notice when I do put the glaze on the pot, I don't turn around and do something else. I don't leave it for a minute. It's really like maybe 15 seconds that I'm dipping something in. And then I'm going to pour that out. You see how the wax is doing what it's supposed to. It's resisting that glaze. And I have to hold it here until it gets back, goes from the shiny to the matte, so that I can turn it right side up and set it down. I can see a couple little bubbles of glaze on that foot, so I'm going to go ahead and clean that off. And just about ready. All right, I've got my little, almost like a belly button over here. Could do something maybe fun with that, but I'm going to just touch up that. And I noticed the tong hit up here, although it looks like it's glazed. So I think that's got a thorough glazing, and I don't think that that little dot in the center is going to show. I think it's going to meld in with the temperature of the glaze. So once I've got the pieces glazed, then I need to prepare them for the kiln. And so we have one final step that we're going to do, and that is to take a little bit of clay. And this clay is a mixture of kaolin and white silica sand. We just put those two chemicals together so that there's no iron in this mix. Kaolin is the main ingredient in porcelain. And so that when I use these as wads on the bottom of the pot to hold it up from the shelf, they won't stick because they don't have any iron in them. So I'm making some little wads of clay, and since this is beach sand and kaolin, I can use my hands for it. And I'm just going to demonstrate how we put these little wads on. They don't have to be big, and we have a few other techniques that as you explore the studio you'll see for separating the pots from the shelves. But in the beginning, this is such a good way to make sure that nothing sticks to the shelves. So I'm going to take a little glue, which I put somewhere handy. And, oh, I've set it over there. Okay. So we have Elmer's glue. We put this so that we can stick the wads to the bottom of the pot, and then the glue will burn off in the firing, and the wads will come loose after the firing, since they are made to not stick. So now I'm ready to set this back in the kiln room on the shelves for cone 10. The interesting thing I think in ceramics is that well, if you had your own studio and your own kiln, you can fire as many pots as you want at a time, but to get the best firings and the most even firings, it's important to have a full kiln load. So we get the pots ready, look at our shelves, and once the shelves are full, we're pretty close to being ready to load the kiln. Usually I put 3 wads on everything because 3, will stay steady even if one is a little shorter than the other. But this being this little oval shape, I had to put 4 on that to keep it from rocking and leaning over. But I'll be able to put 3 on my mug to demonstrate what we do most often with the wads. Then I'll set these back in on the shelf and we'll be ready to load and fire. We have gas kilns and electric kilns in the studio, and for a university our scale, we really have a nice, very nice setup. Matter of fact, when I was in grad school and then started teaching here, one of my teachers sent students out in the summer to fire with us because we had such a nice kiln setup. When I'm doing a mug, I always put 1 wad beneath the handle because there's the weight of the handle. I don't want that to knock over in the firing. So set those. I always set them on paper in case the glue runs, because we could always rip up the piece of paper and put it in the kiln. It would just burn right off. But if I glued it to the table, I might pull my wad off. So I'll do this one more on this little guy, and we'll be ready to load up. All right. Cool. don't forget to clean up.